Nauru, a tiny island microstate that got rich from birch, lost it all, and now all of its people are obese. Okay, putting it like that is perhaps a bit too extreme, but that's not too far from what happened. Nauru is an island nation so small you could fit 3 of it inside Manhattan. And yes, once it was the richest country on Earth per capita, but today, just 50 years later, it's all gone. A country with almost nothing, no rivers, no farmland, no real exports, and yet everything that happened here is a warning to the rest of the world. Let's rewind. Nauru lies in the heart of the Pacific Ocean, about 1,500 miles northeast of Australia. A tiny speck of land surrounded by thousands of miles of open sea. For most of its existence, Nauru was insignificant and isolated. Then, someone discovered that the ground beneath their feet was basically made of money. The island sat on reserves of phosphate, a white, chalky substance formed from centuries of bird feces. Yes, really, bird poop. Seabirds eat a lot of fish, so their feces are rich in phosphate. And then, guano is a substance that forms when layers and layers of these feces accumulate. And Nauru had the optimal geographical properties to make bird feces into money. For thousands of years, seabirds used Nauru as a toilet. And because Nauru is a raised coral atoll with minimal rainfall, the guano didn't wash away. It just kept building up, layer upon layer, like a scrumptious geological lasagna, while the scorching hot sun of the tropical Pacific dried it. Over time, bacteria, pressure, and geochemical processes transformed it into high-grade phosphate rock. Nauru basically became a mountain of agricultural fertilizer. So, in essence, the poop turned into a literal money-printing glitch, like so much money. Because in the 20th century, this type of phosphate was gold for farmers. By the 1970s, after gaining independence from Australia, Nauruans took full control of the phosphate mines, and the money came flooding in. And it showed. We're talking private jets, luxury cars, overseas real estate. At one point, Nauru had the highest GDP per capita in the world. The tiny nation even had its own unproportionally large airline that offered free flights. With a population fewer than a small town, the national airline of Nauru at one point operated 7 Boeing 737 jets. That means roughly 1 seat for every 3 citizens. And since, for obvious reasons, most of its flights flew empty, they started to offer heavily subsidized and sometimes free flights to leaders of neighboring nations and other VIPs. For many years, Nauruans didn't pay tax, got free healthcare, free education, and monthly dividend checks from the Phosphate Trust Fund. Many became paper millionaires. People bought imported cars, even though there was only one paved road around the island. Then, slowly, it all started to melt away. The phosphate reserves started to diminish. So, what did Nauru do? It took the classic route for countries with dwindling resources. They dug deeper, and I mean that literally. The island went from this to this. The mining began to tear away at the land, leaving giant craters, stripping the island of its soil and making it almost uninhabitable. I mean, just look at how grim these satellite pictures look. Nauru's landscape turned into a post-apocalyptic moon surface with no real way to replenish what had been extracted. Being aware of the vanishing phosphate reserves, Nauru tried to diversify. Well, partly. Their strategy to expand their economy, building a skyscraper in Melbourne. Yes, the country with practically zero other resources decided to build a high-rise in a city thousands of miles away. Then, their next move, offshore banking. Nauru set up a series of shell companies and banking operations, hoping to leverage their wealth and gain international financial status. However, the strategy backfired. Nauru became a haven for money laundering, with several international scandals tying the tiny nation to questionable financial dealings. It didn't take long for the global community to catch on to the fact that Nauru was using its financial system for tax evasion, which further tarnished its reputation. And that skyscraper in Melbourne, the building was supposed to symbolize Nauru's economic success. But, just like the island itself, it became a symbol of misguided ambition. The real estate market took a downturn, and Nauru's overseas investments ended up being a financial burden rather than a golden ticket. By the time Nauru realized that the phosphate was running out, it was already too late. The once lush pockets of wealth had become a desolate financial wasteland. But instead of focusing on sustainable development or finding new industries, Nauru dug itself into a deeper hole. You thought the skyscraper was the peak of their investment strategy? In the late 1990s, Nauru began recognizing breakaway or disputed states in exchange for financial aid or investment promises. Effectively, geopolitical freelancing with a cash for recognition strategy. And they did this more than once. Nauru had formed diplomatic ties to Taiwan already in the 80s. Then, in 2002, Nauru ditched Taiwan for China, lured by a $130 million aid package. Taiwan instantly cut ties. But then, just 3 years later, in 2005, Nauru flipped again, re-recognizing colonizing Taiwan and breaking up with China. And in 2009, Nauru looked towards the Caucasus Mountains. It offered the two Georgian breakaway regions of Abkhazia and South Ossetia recognition in exchange for money. Russia bid immediately, $50 million in aid. Nauru had found a way to make money through diplomacy. One of their final moves was to take on massive debt, hoping that it would somehow save the country from its inevitable decline. They borrowed from Australia, international banks, and anyone who would lend them money. And instead of investing the borrowed funds wisely, Nauru used the money to keep up its lavish spending, as well as some, well, questionable ventures. The government, in a dazzling display of financial optimism, funded a West End musical about Leonardo da Vinci. The aim was to create an international hit that would pay cultural and monetary dividends to the island nation. However, it bombed spectacularly. Audiences hated it, critics panned it, and after just 5 weeks, it closed abruptly. So, like the other strategies, the lending didn't end well. They were soon drowning in debt with no income to pay it off. And if that wasn't enough, Nauru's dire financial situation forced them to lean into even more controversial decisions. Short of options for income, they agreed to host an Australian immigration detention center on their island. Some claim Australia exploited Nauru's fragile situation to reach this deal, but basically, the venture did not go well for either party. The revenue from it was short-term, but the cost to Nauru's global reputation was long-term. The human rights abuses at the facility caused outrage and criticism from around the world, and Nauru found itself increasingly isolated on the international stage. Now, you might be wondering, how did this roller coaster of riches to ruin impact the average Nauruan? Well, not so favorably. With the sudden shift in wealth and lifestyle, the population turned from more traditional subsistence to imported foods, especially processed foods. Fast foods, sugary drinks, and high-calorie snacks flooded the island, and the result was an epidemic of obesity. Today, Nauru has one of the highest obesity rates in the world, with around 70 to 80% of adults classified as overweight or obese. It's an unfortunate byproduct of prosperity gone wrong. The people who once lived on subsistence diets now face the health consequences of fast food, diabetes, heart disease, and other chronic illnesses. The same country that once thrived on bird poop now battles with some of the worst health issues on Earth, and yet the island is stuck in a vicious cycle. Limited resources, limited future prospects, and an economic history that became a cautionary tale.